Visa wars, U.S. targets, Nigeria's corrupt elites, Africa's fight against impunity. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we unmask power and inspire change. I'm Zainab Karoma. Tonight we ask, when the U.S. bars corrupt Nigerian elites from visas, is it justice or just geopolitics? And how can Africa fight back with its own solutions? Stay with us. On the 23rd of September 2025, the U.S. mission in Nigeria issued a pointed reminder: fighting corruption knows no borders or limits on accountability. Even when high-profile individuals engage in corruption, they can be barred from receiving U.S. visas. At first glance, it's a stern public posture. But as with many diplomatic declarations, the real story lies in the nuance: what is enforceable, what is symbolic, how uniformly it might be applied, and whether it changes behavior or simply deepens tensions. Below, I examine the Nigerian case in light of Africa's wider experience, what challenges lie ahead, and whether visa bans are a serious tool or just another political hammer. Nigeria's moment in the spotlight. The Nigerian context. Nigeria has long been maligned for entrenched corruption and impunity. Even the chairman of Nigeria's anti-graft agency, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, Ola Olukoyede, has acknowledged that Nigeria is regarded as a nation with entrenched corruption and impunity in Africa. In response, the U.S. reiteration is hardly novel, but it signals a push toward more personal accountability at elite levels. In recent memory, the U.S. has used visa bans as a stick for individuals implicated in undermining elections or engaging in major graft. What is perhaps newer is the public framing. No more "we might," but a declarative "we can and we will." Cue dramatic theme music. Still, rhetoric is easier than execution. Questions abound. Which individuals? On what standard of proof? Under which legal authority? And how do you prevent selective enforcement or political abuse? The recent visa validity shift, a closer blow, adding gravity to the threat. The U.S. already in July 2025 changed its visa policy for Nigerians. Non-immigrant visas are now limited to single-entry, 3-month validity, replacing the prior multi-entry up to 5-year visas. That change is arguably more immediately felt. Ordinary Nigerians planning business, tourism, or family travel are now impacted, regardless of corruption or lack thereof. It underscores that the visa policy is a lever that can impose costs beyond the intended target class of high-profile corrupt persons, Africa-wide comparisons, who's next, and who already fought back, precedents on the continent. The U.S. hasn't reserved visa bans for Nigeria alone. For example, in April 2024, the U.S. barred 4 former Malawi officials for corruption, citing their abusing public office in awarding contracts. This demonstrates the U.S. is willing to impose personal restrictions as a tool of accountability in Africa, not just rhetorical warnings. Another tool is the Global Magnitsky Act regime, through which the U.S. can impose visa bans and asset freezes on foreign officials for corruption or human rights abuses. It is sometimes used in parallel to diplomatic threats. However, implementation is uneven. Critics argue that the U.S. is opaque about how it picks names, sometimes exercising waiver or omission. Some officials waltz into the U.S. despite serious allegations, raising questions about political or strategic exceptions, regional differences in pushback and compliance. Kenya/East Africa. Historically, U.S. pressure over corruption in East Africa, e.g. in Kenya, has been strongest in discrete cases, e.g. graft involving U.S. funds, but broad visa bans have been rare. South Africa, Southern Africa. South Africa, because of its strategic importance, has been more insulated from sweeping individual visa bans, though U.S. sanctions and reputational pressure are more common tools. Francophone West/Central Africa. In countries with weaker governance systems, U.S. threats may carry more weight. but also risk being dismissed as neo-imperial posturing if not matched with local institutional follow-through. In short, Nigeria is not unique, but it is in many ways a test case, especially given its population, economic weight in Africa, and the volume of U.S.-bound travel and diaspora interactions. The legal and practical challenges. It's not as simple as it sounds. Which statute under U.S. law? The U.S. visa ban authority in corruption cases is often exercised under Section 7031C of U.S. law, which allows the Secretary of State to deny visas to foreign officials involved in significant corruption. That law gives broad discretion, but does not require the State Department to name individuals publicly, making transparency difficult. Moreover, the Department of State reportedly sets higher internal standards than the statutory text, partly to guard against legal challenge. So many who might qualify in a morally obvious way may still evade ban due to evidentiary or procedural barriers. The risk of selective or politically motivated use. When a government, external or internal, starts policing corruption, politics creep in. A U.S. visa ban that targets one individual but spares another, all else equal, may raise accusations of bias, influence, or geopolitical interest. Additionally, once visa bans are normalized, there's a risk of delegitimizing them. They could become a tool of diplomatic grandstanding rather than genuine anti-corruption enforcement. Enforcement limitations. The U.S. cannot easily police who travels on third-country visas or via alternate routes. Visa bans don't restrict local activity. They only bar physical entry to the U.S. Some high-profile officials may negotiate waivers or exceptions, e.g., for diplomatic travel. Collecting credible evidence, affording due process, and sustaining legal defensibility is resource-intensive and politically fraught. Forward-looking. Scenarios, risks, and opportunities. Scenario A. Genuine deterrence. In the best case, the U.S. begins to credibly ban dozens of corrupt officials across Africa, coupled with public transparency, naming rationale. The reputational risk of being banned acts as a real dissuasive force for would-be kleptocrats. In Nigeria, perhaps a few senators, governors, or ministers think twice before skimming. Civil society and the media, even whistleblowers, gain more leverage. Scenario B, symbolic posturing with limited follow-through. Alternatively, the visa ban talk becomes mostly symbolic, a diplomatic stick waved but rarely used. Names remain unpublished, enforcement is selective, and the underlying corrupt incentives remain intact. Over time, cynics treat it as part of the foreign pressure theater that African elites can shrug off. Scenario C, backlash and countermeasures. A worst-case outcome, Nigeria or other African states push back hard. We might see legal or constitutional challenges, domestic, against what might be deemed extraterritorial policing. Diplomatic tit-for-tat, Nigeria restricting U.S. officials' travel, imposing reciprocal bans, or leveraging alliances, e.g. with China, Russia, to resist. Strain in U.S.-Nigeria cooperation on security, investment, or aid if bans get applied to key actors. Narrative pushback, accusations of neo-imperialism, infringement on sovereignty, or selective justice, mitigating the risks. To make this more constructive, several supports are needed. 1. Transparency and due process. Publish criteria, name names where possible, allow rebuttal or appeal. 2. Multilateral approaches. The U.S. should not be the only actor. African states, the African Union, or regional blocs should internalize similar mechanisms. 3rd, linkage with support. Visa bans must be paired with capacity building, support to investigative agencies, judicial reform, audit systems, protections for whistleblowers, etc. 4. Calibration and feedback loops. Monitor the actual impact. Do bans reduce graft or just push it underground? Adjust policy based on results. A bit of humor, because we need it. If governance failures were punished with traffic tickets, Nigeria would be the speeding king of the continent. Except there's no speed limit and the cop is asleep. The U.S. threat is like waking up the traffic warden and saying, "Hey, I see you've been ignoring these tailgaters for years. Time to clamp some tires." Whether the wardens keep up around the bend, that's the question. Also, imagine a corrupt state official shivering at the thought, "Oh no, I might have to get an entry stamp I can't forge." Yes, villains have visa angst too. Latest developments worth watching. The U.S. visa validity change to single entry 3 months for Nigerians. This has already unnerved many and presses home that visa policy is not just rhetoric. The U.S. has put Nigeria among 36 other countries, 25 of them African, on notice. Improve your travel vetting systems and address overstay issues or risk further restrictions. Meanwhile, in more modest but concrete terms, Malawi saw 4 former officials barred over corruption, proof that the U.S. is willing to act, not just talk. Reports suggest that some visa restrictions under U.S. policy are being eased in selected cases involving African leaders, showing that the tool is malleable. Nigeria's internal battle, the EFCC, judiciary and political will. Nigeria's fight against corruption has long been waged by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, created in 2003 amid pressure from the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. But the EFCC's record is mixed. It has won some high-profile prosecutions, but is also accused of selective enforcement, targeting opposition politicians while shielding those close to power. Chairman Ola Olukoyede recently admitted that Nigeria is regarded as a nation with entrenched corruption and impunity. This rare candor from an official is refreshing, but it underscores the Sisyphean task. An anti-corruption agency is only as strong as the judiciary that adjudicates its cases, and Nigeria's judiciary itself is plagued by bribery and political interference. Add to this the role of state governors, many of whom wield immunity while in office. The result? Investigations often stall until after officials leave office, by which time records are shredded, witnesses intimidated, and the looted funds already parked in offshore havens. It's like trying to catch a thief after he has already sold your TV and invested the proceeds in a Dubai villa. African comparisons, lessons across the continent. Nigeria is hardly alone in this struggle. Across Africa, countries grapple with similar dynamics, but with different responses and levels of political will. Ghana, often celebrated as a beacon of democracy in West Africa, Ghana still suffers from corruption scandals. The Office of the Special Prosecutor, created in 2017, has been hamstrung by limited resources and political pushback. Yet, compared to Nigeria, Ghana's judiciary is relatively stronger, giving anti-graft cases a better chance. South Africa. The state capture inquiry under Justice Raymond Zondo exposed how former President Jacob Zuma and the Gupta family hollowed out institutions. Unlike Nigeria, however, South Africa showed resilience. Civil society, the judiciary, and investigative journalism kept pressure alive. Zuma was even briefly jailed for contempt of court, proof that no one is completely untouchable. Kenya. President William Ruto's government has made flashy anti-corruption pledges, but critics argue that prosecutions remain selective. Kenya's anti-graft bodies suffer from the same credibility issues as Nigeria's EFCC. Yet, Kenya differs in its public accountability culture. Media and civil society activism are more confrontational, often embarrassing corrupt elites into retreat. Rwanda, a different model altogether. Rwanda enforces strict accountability. Even ministers have been jailed for corruption. But critics argue that the system is not fully democratic. It relies heavily on President Kagame's centralized control. Nigeria, with its democratic pluralism and federal structure, cannot simply transplant Rwanda's model. Policy lessons for Nigeria and neighbors. From these comparisons, 3 lessons emerge. 1. Strengthen judicial independence. Without a judiciary insulated from political capture, anti-corruption bodies will remain toothless. Nigeria needs reforms that protect judges from political interference, enhance transparency in appointments, and punish judicial misconduct. 2. Civil society as watchdog countries like South Africa show that robust media and civil activism can keep pressure on elites. Nigeria's media is vibrant but vulnerable to intimidation, while whistleblowers lack strong protection. Building a culture of protection for truth-tellers is key. Third, international leverage with domestic buy-in. U.S. visa bans can provide external leverage, but domestic ownership is critical. Nigeria must design reforms not because Washington threatens travel bans, but because Nigerians themselves demand accountability. Otherwise, foreign pressure will always be painted as neo-imperial bullying. Forward-looking, can visa bans be a catalyst? If Nigeria and Africa broadly treats visa bans not as humiliation, but as a wake-up call, this tool could catalyze reforms. Imagine the embarrassment of a governor explaining to his children why they can't attend Harvard because dad is on the U.S. naughty list. Suddenly, corruption hits home, not just the Treasury. But if bans are applied selectively or without transparency, they risk backfiring, feeding populist narratives. See, the West wants to keep us down while they court our resources. That rhetoric already finds fertile ground across Africa, especially as China, Russia, and Gulf states step up engagement without imposing value-based conditions. A dose of humor again. If corruption were a sport, Nigeria would qualify for the World Cup, with politicians as strikers and the Treasury as the goalpost. The EFCC, sadly, often looks like the goalkeeper who dives in the wrong direction, or worse, joins the celebration after conceding. Meanwhile, the U.S. is like FIFA threatening to revoke Nigeria's visa to enter the tournament. Question is, will that stop the handballs or just push players to another league? Nigeria's youth and diaspora, a sleeping giant in the anti-corruption fight. Nigeria's greatest untapped anti-corruption weapon isn't in Washington, London, or Beijing. It's in Lagos, Abuja, Toronto, Houston, and London. The youth population, over 70% of Nigerians, are under 30, and the diaspora community, which remits over $20 billion annually, more than foreign direct investment, hold transformative potential. The youth factor. Nigeria's youth have shown flashes of political and civic energy, from the hashtag #EndSARS movement in 2020 to student-driven voter registration campaigns. The challenge has been sustainability. Youth often mobilize around flashpoint issues, but lack platforms to transform energy into long-term institutional reform. But youth pressure can bite. When U.S. visa bans target corrupt elites, youth activists could amplify the impact, branding those individuals as internationally disgraced and mobilizing domestic outrage. In short, make corruption uncool. After all, in an age of TikTok, nothing terrifies a politician more than becoming a meme. The diaspora angle. The Nigerian diaspora has financial clout, political networks, and social media firepower. They can name and shame. Diaspora advocacy groups can amplify visa bans by publishing names, lobbying in host countries, and linking bans to specific cases of theft. Conditional giving. Diaspora remittances often bypass government, but diaspora investors could tie financial support to governance reforms. Imagine if diaspora communities demanded transparency reports before donating to hometown projects. Bridge builders. Diaspora professionals in law, tech, and finance can help Nigerian institutions adopt global best practices, from blockchain-based procurement systems to forensic auditing. If properly organized, Nigeria's youth and diaspora could make the U.S. visa ban policy less of an external stick and more of a catalyst for bottom-up accountability. Continental lens, the AU's Anti-Corruption Convention. Africa actually has its own convention on preventing and combating corruption, adopted by the African Union, AU, in 2003. It obliges states to criminalize bribery, illicit enrichment, and money laundering, but as of 2025, its record is lackluster. Ratification versus implementation. Most African states have ratified it, but actual compliance is thin. Few countries report regularly to the AU Advisory Board on corruption. Peer pressure missing. Unlike the African Peer Review Mechanism, APRM, the Anti-Corruption Convention hasn't developed into a forum where states openly evaluate one another. Instead, reporting is perfunctory and often sanitized. Funding gap. The AU body itself is underfunded, limiting its ability to investigate or coordinate continent-wide accountability drives. If the AU revitalized this convention, it could create a homegrown visa ban regime, Africans banning Africans from cross-border privileges. Imagine a corrupt official in Sierra Leone being denied travel to Nigeria or South Africa, not just the US. That would sting even more because it strips them of their African legitimacy. The future. An African-led solution to corruption. Looking forward, 3 scenarios stand out. 1. Youth diaspora pressure, plus U.S. leverage visa bans, spark memes, protests, and diaspora activism. Corrupt officials face reputational costs at home and abroad. Nigeria begins to see a culture shift. Corruption is no longer a badge of big man power, but a scarlet letter. Second, continental enforcement. The AU retools its anti-corruption convention, setting up a Pan-African blacklist. Offenders can't escape to Dubai or the US, but more importantly, they can't move freely across Africa, making it impossible to attend summits, launder money regionally, or enjoy elite privileges. 3. Business as usual, the comedy of corruption. The most likely short-term scenario, visa bans are issued selectively, African elites shrug them off, and China, Russia, or Turkey offer alternative havens. Ordinary Nigerians still face tighter visa restrictions than the untouchables do. Cue the tragicomedy. The honest graduate can't get a student visa, but the looter has a condo in Dubai. A touch of humor to drive it home. Imagine this. A Nigerian governor accused of siphoning billions is barred from getting a U.S. visa. Furious, he calls his travel agent, "Governor, book me a flight to New York. I need to see my doctor." Agent, "Sorry, sir, your visa has been revoked." Governor, "Fine." Then London. Agent, "They're reviewing your case too." Governor, "Okay, what about Dubai?" Agent, "Available, sir, but no Gucci sales this week." Governor, "What?" Now that's the real punishment. Sometimes humor reveals the deeper truth. These bans matter not because they reform governance directly, but because they hit elites where it hurts. They're like the geopolitical chessboard. Can U.S. visa bans compete with Beijing, Moscow, and Dubai? The U.S. isn't the only player on Africa's stage. When Washington waves the visa ban stick, African elites increasingly ask, "So what? I'll just fly east." This is where geopolitics complicates anti-corruption diplomacy. China, business, no questions asked. China has become Africa's largest trading partner, pumping billions into infrastructure, mining, and digital technology. Beijing doesn't tie aid or investment to values-based conditions like transparency. For many African leaders, this is refreshing. For accountability advocates, it's terrifying. Counterweight to U.S. bans. A Nigerian politician who can't shop on Fifth Avenue can still stroll through Beijing's luxury malls. Symbolism. U.S. pressure makes some elites pivot eastward, reinforcing the narrative of Western hypocrisy versus Chinese pragmatism. But even China is tightening scrutiny on some African deals, wary of debt defaults. Beijing doesn't care about corruption per se, but it cares if corruption undermines its loans. Russia. Sanctions-proof partners in crime Moscow, under heavy Western sanctions, has styled itself as a patron of African sovereignty. Russia offers military partnerships, mercenaries via Wagner's successors, and diplomatic cover at the UN. Visa bans irrelevant. Russian visas are easy to obtain for African elites, and Moscow doesn't blacklist for corruption. Political leverage. African leaders facing U.S. pressure may embrace Russia as an ally against neo-colonial bullying. The twist, Russia itself is embroiled in systemic corruption. For Nigerian or Malian elites, Moscow offers solidarity, not scrutiny. Gulf states, the safe haven Dubai, Doha, and Riyadh are arguably more attractive than Washington for African kleptocrats. Lifestyle. Dubai offers luxury condos, private schooling, shopping, and medical care. The same perks elites once sought in the West. Banking secrecy. Despite reforms, Gulf jurisdictions remain comfortable havens for hidden assets. Visa ease. Many African elites can enter with little hassle compared to the long queues at U.S. embassies. So while U.S. bans sting reputationally, practically speaking, corrupt elites often just pivot to alternative hubs. The soft power dilemma. Washington's problem is one of soft power competition. A visa ban works when access to the U.S. is considered elite currency. But when alternatives exist, its deterrence weakens. Past reality, a Harvard degree for your child, a medical checkup at Johns Hopkins, or a photo op at the White House were irresistible. Present reality, a London or Dubai option may suffice. A Moscow or Beijing shield may neutralize diplomatic embarrassment. This doesn't mean U.S. bans are useless, but it highlights their limitation. They're a partial tool in a multipolar world. Forward-looking, making visa bans bite in a multipolar age. For U.S. bans to matter, they must, 1. Be multilateralized, work with the EU, UK, Canada, and ideally even Gulf states to harmonize bans. If London, Paris, and Dubai close their doors simultaneously, elites will feel the squeeze. 2. Be transparent. Publicly naming and shaming builds domestic legitimacy. Otherwise, bans risk being seen as secret deals. 3. Be coupled with asset freezes. A ban without a financial freeze is like locking the thief out of your house while letting him keep the stolen TV. 4. Support local activists. Give Nigerian civil society the tools to pressure their own leaders so bans don't look like foreign diktats. A comic relief scene. Picture this: a Nigerian senator, recently banned from the U.S., is sulking in his Abuja mansion. His aide rushes in. Aide, sir, don't worry, we can apply for a Chinese visa. Senator, but does China have Disneyland? Aide, no, but they have panda reserves. Senator, fine. Book Beijing, but remind them I like VIP treatment and buy me a panda. It's absurd, but it captures the essence. When U.S. tools are not matched globally, corruption finds another playground. Flipping the script, an African-led playbook for real consequences. 1. Build an African visa ban network, homegrown Magnitsky Light. Africa already has the legal scaffolding to cooperate on integrity, the AU Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption and its advisory board. What's missing is a teethy continent-wide consequence that VIPs actually feel. The AU, through the advisory board, could coordinate a confidential to public designation pipeline that asks RECs, ECOWAS, EAC, SADC, etc., to deny VIP travel privileges to named officials across member states, especially for summit access, government delegations, and VIP lanes. The AU body exists. 48 countries have ratified the convention, so the vehicle is there. Why this stings: ECOWAS, for example, already has free movement norms. Revoking those privileges for designated officials would be a reputational thunderclap at home and a practical headache abroad. How to operationalize quickly. AU Advisory Board issues model criteria: significant corruption, election subversion, major procurement fraud. Aligned with the AU Convention, RECs implement reciprocal travel consequences. Start with region-first pilots, ECOWAS/EAC, then scale to the AU. ECOWAS's long-standing free movement framework is a natural place to test targeted suspensions of privileges for named officials. Side benefit: once African peers start saying, "Not in our house," US/EU/UK designations become amplifiers rather than the main act, and designated officials can't just pivot to regional circuits for prestige. 2. Turn Africa's new payments rails into integrity rails. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPSS, supported by central banks and Afreximbank, now connects banks across the continent and is rolling out an Africa currency marketplace to match FX flows locally, i.e., fewer detours through the dollar. That's system-level leverage, a practical surgical idea. Make PAPSS compliance packs standard, politically exposed persons, PEP flags, beneficial ownership attestations on large cross-border public sector transactions, and audit trails for state-linked payments. For countries that opt in, designated corrupt officials lose PAPSS access for government-related transfers. If your money can't clear across African rails, your favorite cross-border schemes get lonely. Translation, shrink the escape lanes inside Africa, not just the shopping trips abroad. 3. Make free movement mean free of corruption too. The AU Free Movement Protocol is lagging on ratifications, but the debate is alive in 2025. ECA, PAP, AUC, all pushing. Bake anti-corruption conditionality into the protocol's implementation guide, e.g., fast-track mobility for clean public procurement projects, mobility restrictions for designated officials until domestic due process clears them. That way, mobility becomes a governance dividend, not a loophole, while keeping due process guardrails. 4. Crowd and youth plus diaspora as co-enforcers. Give accredited civil society coalitions a right of submission to the AU Advisory Board and REC ethics committees, backed by safe channels for evidence, procurement data, asset registries, court filings. Publish quarterly integrity dashboards naming institutions, not just people. Which ministries followed open contracting? Which states publish beneficial owners of winning bidders? Which parastatals use e-invoicing with machine-readable trails? Yes, it's nerdy, but in 2025, nerdy is power. Why this matters more right now. The U.S. mission in Nigeria's warning, visa bars for high-profile corrupt actors, landed this week, part of a broader tightening that already reduced most Nigerian non-immigrant visas to single-entry, 3-month validity in July 2025. That's a big lifestyle shock and a reminder that visas are now an instrument of policy. The U.S. also shows it will act beyond rhetoric, e.g., Malawi's 4 ex-officials barred in 2024. The tool works, but Africa can localize the idea so that consequences don't depend on Washington's mood swings. Reality check and how to avoid own goals. Due process. A URECS must publish criteria, allow reasoned appeals, and time limit designations unless renewed with fresh evidence. Otherwise, the tool becomes political score settling. Avoid collective punishment. Don't blanket punish ordinary travelers, a critique now heard in Nigeria after the 2025 validity cut. Target named officials and enablers. Measure impact, pair designations with a public metrics pack, e.g., procurement overpricing indices, conviction rates, amounts recovered, days from charge to judgment. If indicators don't improve, recalibrate. A quick Africa-wide comparator table, policy levers you can copy tomorrow. Lever. Who owns it now? African upgrade that bites why VIPs care, travel bans, US/E, U/UK, case by case, AU/RECS, reciprocal VIP travel suspensions for designated officials, summits, medical trips, kids' graduations, photo ops, naming and shaming, Western treasuries/media. AU Advisory Board plus REC bulletins, procurement integrity scorecards, each quarter, reputation at home and within party caucuses, asset friction, global banks pay PSS rules on PEPs, Afreximbank KYC overlays, BO registries tied to procurement harder to move money for luxury/real estate deals, mobility incentives, a U-free movement protocol with integrity dividends, fast lanes for clean actors, aligns prestige with compliance sources for institutional details, AU Advisory Board and Convention, ECOWAS Free Movement Framework, PAPSS/Afreximbank, current AU push to ratify free movement in 2025. Comic interlude because governance medicine goes down easier with a smile. Picture an AU summit with a new badge scanner. Scanner. Beep. Integrity check failed. Please proceed to the public apology and asset return booth. VIP, but I'm keynote speaker. Scanner. Great. Your keynote will be streamed from the booth. If we can't quite build that scanner yet, we can approximate it with policy. Where this leaves Nigeria and Africa, Nigeria doesn't have to wait for a perfect AU consensus. It can pilot a domestic designation regime that automatically requests reciprocal travel suspensions from ECOWAS. PAPSS-based payment flags for ministries and SOES. No clean BO data, no cross-border payment. A quarterly integrity ledger, open data, tracking prosecutions, recoveries, procurement red flags, and which cases triggered regional requests. Do that, and the U.S. visa drumbeat becomes supporting percussion, not the whole orchestra. Stress testing and African playbook, 3 tough cases, 1. Election interference networks across Africa. Election manipulation is often greased with money. Illicit campaign financing, ballot box tampering, and procurement fraud for electoral materials. U.S. visa bans have previously targeted individuals undermining elections in Nigeria and elsewhere, turned zero search one source. How the African toolkit could respond. Sea-level bans. ECOWAS could suspend VIP travel rights of officials implicated in election interference, tying it to the bloc's democracy protocols. PAPSS tripwire. Election commissions must clear procurement invoices, ballots, ICT equipment only if contractors and officials are listed in open beneficial ownership registries. Civil society alerts. Youth and diaspora networks feed evidence into REC ethics committees during election periods. Impact. Corrupt officials may still shout slogans, but traveling for post-election medical checks in Johannesburg or holidaying in Accra suddenly becomes off-limits. 2. Oil sector procurement cartels. Nigeria's oil sector has long been fertile ground for corruption, opaque licensing, inflated contracts, and sweetheart deals. Billions leak annually. How the African toolkit could respond. Cross-border suspension. AU designations strip implicated companies and their directors of preferential market access across Africa. Integrity filters. PAPSS embeds a red flag rule. Large oil-linked payments flagged unless accompanied by BO data and verified contract IDs. Naming and shaming. The AU Advisory Board publishes an energy integrity ledger, naming firms that passed or failed checks. Impact. Cartels can no longer hide behind shell firms or hop payments across borders without scrutiny. 3. Judiciary capture. Judges who sell verdicts for political patrons are a nightmare for anti-corruption agencies. When courts themselves are compromised, reforms collapse. How the African toolkit could respond. RISI peer review. ECOWAS judicial councils review cases of compromised rulings backed by civil society petitions. Mobility curbs. Judges found complicit lose privileges to attend international legal conferences or AU judicial forums. Incentive flips. AU fast-track scholarships, exchanges, and visibility for judges with proven integrity records. Impact. The prestige game shifts. Corrupt judges face travel isolation. Clean judges gain continental stature. Comparative lens. Lessons from peers. Kenya. Active civil society and media keep corruption scandals in the spotlight, though prosecutions lag. Kenya could pilot a PAPSS integrity module in public procurement. South Africa. The Zondo Commission proved the value of deep investigations and public transparency. Linking findings to AU/REC designations would amplify deterrence. Ghana. While less dramatic than Nigeria, corruption scandals still bite. Ghana's relatively credible judiciary could anchor AU/ECOWAS peer review mechanisms. Together, these peers show Africa already has building blocks. What's missing is continental coordination. Advice to African leaders. 1. Don't outsource integrity. Waiting for Washington to issue visa bans is like asking your neighbor to discipline your children. Build your own consequences at home and regionally. 2. Lead by example. Voluntarily publish beneficial ownership of your assets, contracts, and political donations. Credibility starts with disclosure. 3. Embrace peer accountability. Allow RECs and the AU to review sensitive corruption cases, even when uncomfortable. Sovereignty isn't undermined by transparency, it's strengthened. 4. Invest in institutions, not optics. Strengthen auditors, prosecutors, and data systems, not just anti-corruption campaigns. Campaigns fade, systems endure. 5. Mobilize youth and diaspora. Give them safe channels to report corruption and a seat at the reform table. Their legitimacy outweighs any foreign pressure. Summary of key messages. U.S. visa bans on corrupt Nigerians are a wake-up call, but they are limited in a multipolar world where elites pivot to Beijing, Moscow, or Dubai. Nigeria's institutions, EFCC, judiciary, civil society, remain the first line of defense, but they must be reinforced. Africa has its own tools. The AU Anti-Corruption Convention, ECOWAS, Free Movement Regime, and PAPSS financial rails. Used creatively, these can impose homegrown consequences. Youth and diaspora activism are under-leveraged powerhouses that can turn reputational pressure into real change. Policy innovation is possible. Integrity-linked visa bans, payment flags, and continental integrity dashboards could reset the incentives of public office. Ultimately, Africa doesn't need to rely solely on Washington's threats. It can craft its own accountability ecosystem, one where corruption truly costs. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV, where Africa's stories are told with courage and clarity. Remember, corruption may be global, but accountability must be African. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And hit the notification bell so you never miss a bold perspective. Together, we make the difference.